Hamish, I guess you were already introduced, but I'm personally happy to be sitting down with you because, is my microphone working? Yeah. We had talked about getting coffee like 5 years ago when you first started Substack.
Right.
And I mean, it's really incredible. We never did get coffee. I should have gotten coffee with you.
We're doing it now.
Yeah, we're doing it now. But it's incredibly what you've built, this company that's now responsible for, like, I think producing meaningful revenue for something like 17,000 people. And,
that's right.
And many more, if you don't mind me using my notes here, but Substack said it had 20 million active monthly users recently, including for free newsletters, and 2 million paid subscriptions to writers, so kudos.
Thanks.
And I did notice that maybe it was in February that Substack started using sort of very specific language about building a new economic engine for culture, which suggests that Substack wants to do much more than be a newsletter platform for writers.
That's right.
I think that what you introduced today or rolled out publicly is part of that notes.
Yep.
I want to talk a little bit about that. I've read tweets, of course, and some drama around it, but
yep.
If you could.
Oh yeah, drama. Okay. Well, by the way, my PR person said I should tell everyone to start posting on Notes during this talk. But Notes is effectively a way for sharing good content, whether it's a short-form post, or a long-form post, or an image, or a comment, or a link, and that helps writers who are on Substack doing great work get discovered and find new subscribers. It bears some visual similarities with some of the existing social media feeds that you see out there, but the key difference is that it's not based on advertising, it's not based on attention, it's based on paid subscriptions, and the money going to the writers, and we think that dynamic is going to change everything about it.
Right. So obviously you didn't name Twitter specifically, but Elon Musk apparently got wind of this feature last week, and I'm sure we've kind of all followed this if you're interested in Substack at all, that he started restricting links. If you linked on something through Twitter, it said the link could be unsafe. I guess he decided to take his foot off your neck as of Sunday or Monday. But I am wondering what you make of the whole episode. I mean, were you taken aback by that response?
It's really disappointing. We don't mind someone considering Substack, the company, a threat to them and taking kind of aggressive action against Substack, the company. But when it affects writers, when writers are falling out, are getting the collateral damage, that's when it starts to really anger us. Writers shouldn't have to pay that price. Writers should be able to share their work freely. Writers should be able to have the rights to free speech. And so we think it's a really disappointing episode overall.
Sure. And I know that you worked for Tesla for a year or so as a writer. Have you ever talked to Elon Musk?
He hired me.
He did? Okay.
Yeah, I was the lead writer.
Boss?
How was he as a boss? Sometimes amazing and sometimes difficult.
Yeah. And has there been any direct contact this time? There's been a lot of back and forth, and I was just wondering if,
We haven't had much contact. We haven't had any official contact from Twitter. We're just sort of trying to read between the lines.
Right. Well, I mean, so Twitter's got something still, I think, 350 million users. So it seems like, maybe a thank you is in order. I mean, I'd be thrilled if, I have a newsletter called StrictlyVC. If he went after me, I'd be like, yes, it's amazing.
It's a lot, yeah. We thought this launch was going to be kind of low-key. It wasn't really going to ruffle anyone's feathers. It's a feature within Substack, serving Substack writers. It's not supposed to be a Twitter killer or anything like that. And so the response is quite surprising, and it's resulted in a lot more attention for this than otherwise would have happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not sorry about that.
That's great. Okay, so I thought we could sort of dive into some of the kind of, you're building a business. Every business is 5 years old, has some challenges. One is, so Musk is kind of in a bind of his own making because a lot of advertisers do not want to advertise now on Twitter. That's not your issue. You are expressly avoiding, you're building around advertisers very expressly. But you have been called out for not reining in bad actors. And I wanted to know if we could talk a little bit about that. Last week, I was seeing the Anti-Defamation League wrote that Substack continues to attract extremists and conspiracy theorists who routinely use the site to profit from spreading anti-Semitism, misinformation, disinformation, hate speech. None of this is new to you. So I guess, what is your response? Why this sort of laissez-faire approach?
Well, we think free speech is a very important principle. it's impossible for me as a former journalist to decouple free speech from a free press, which I think is foundational for a good society, a healthy democracy. I think we've gone through a difficult period in the last 10 years or so where people are starting to feel the effects of these engagement-based attention economy systems that have systems that lead to all sorts of troubles when it comes to things like misinformation or fake news, or worse than that, in my opinion, like the polarization, the divisiveness, divisive behaviors, and this sort of eroding of trust and this constant undermining of the ability we have to understand each other and work together to solve difficult problems. And for the last few years, I think a bunch of people have struck on the idea that the way to address those problems is through more firm and more sophisticated content moderation policies, content moderation apparatuses, teams, hundreds of millions of dollars being poured in to try and solve these problems. And our hypothesis is that these efforts are not solving the problems. In fact, I don't see polarization or misinformation or any of these problems that are dividing society getting any better. See only those things getting worse. Our hypothesis is that the problems at the root level, in the models that are powering these information systems and these networks. And so Substack has taken an approach that is much more akin to what WordPress is doing, for example, which has always had a very strong free speech stance and has never intervened, than something like Twitter and Facebook, which is at a totally different end of the spectrum, where they have different responsibilities and different burdens and different problems to control because of the way that their amplification machines work. So we think a better approach is to change the model so that readers and writers both have more agency. They both have much more control over their own communities. And where we're not, as the company and the three founders of Substack, just some random dudes, are not making the decision so much on who's the good guys and who's the bad guys.
So if I say that we've sort of vividly seen the real world ramifications of misinformation, January 6th, for example, you would say there was moderation in place already and that it didn't stem the issue, and so,
Well, there's lots of, how many things contributed to these sorts of problems happening? And one of them might be rampant, out of control speech on social media. One of them might be something like growing inequality in society. I don't know. Like, I'm not the person who's going to be able to accurately diagnose the exact problems. But you could argue maybe the heavy-handed censoriousness actually played a role in widening the trust gap that leads to problems like this. And all I know for sure is that whatever has been tried for the last few years is not working. It's not working at all. The problems are getting worse. And it's our hypothesis, our bet, and maybe we're wrong, and history can prove us wrong if we are. So far, it seems pretty right. Our bet is that the problem is with the model, not with how people are doing content moderation.
Do you have a content moderation team?
We do. We have a content guidelines that protect the platform at the extremes. Our default stance is hands-off. But of course, we have to guard against things like incitements to violence. We don't allow porn, we don't allow spam, and so we do have a team, and we have a policy that we act on.
So you drew a distinction a second ago between Substack 2 and Twitter, I think, and Facebook, sort of like a social media. But you are becoming more of a social media platform as you sort of, embrace this notes feature, and I'm sure there's more to come. So, I think that's going to make you obviously susceptible to changes in Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which is this law that I've talked to Steve Case, the AOL founder, about a 30-year-old law that protects internet platforms from being sued when people on their
when you
sites,
moderate.
Right, exactly. Or when you don't moderate. It actually gives them a lot of leeway, but changes to it could hamper that. So I'm just wondering, do you sort of talk about that internally, and how are you thinking about possible changes? Because the Supreme Court right now is looking at a couple of cases that are going to be decided this summer. And
yeah, it's on our radar, but we don't obsess about it every day. But it's hard to know which direction that's going to break. it's obviously something that we'll have to adapt to no matter what the decision is. Yeah, but that's a complicated issue.
Well, it is complicated, and also I just wondered if it's something that would be priced into your financing, which is something else I wanted to talk to you about. Because it is kind of, everybody has risks to their business. I would think that is either a risk or it certainly would change a lot of the way that you sort of evolve the company. Let's talk a little bit about your funding situation right now. So last year, the New York Times reported that you had abandoned efforts to raise a Series C round. It said that you were talking to investors about $75 million to $100 million in fresh funding at a $750 million to $1 billion valuation. Is that right?
I won't comment on the numbers at all, but we did go out and look to see what the market might be like, knowing that the market was starting to turn, and we wouldn't have been thinking about raising money at that stage otherwise. But then as the market started to turn sharper than anticipated, we decided it wasn't a good idea to go and raise money at that time. If we did, it would have to be on terms that are just unacceptable to the company. And so we made a decision to take a different path, which is to make the company lean and agile enough that it could survive a cold economic winter, but also set us up so that we can be the masters of our own destiny. So it wouldn't matter what's happening in the external venture climate, that we'll be set up for strength no matter what, and that's what's happened. And so we didn't raise a Series C, but we didn't need it. We're in a very strong financial position right now. We did a community round just last week, was it? Yeah, just last week, which has brought in a little bit more money, but it's not really, that might end up being around $5 million is the max that a community round can be like.
So I saw that it's like 7.7 million, and it says it's still open.
It's still open, yeah, so people can still make commitments. And the response has been amazing. That filled up extremely quickly. But yeah, there's a max on the community round portion of it. And
like 5.1 million or
you can do some things to extend it into a Reg D round if you want to.
Okay.
So I don't know what the ultimate number is going to be, but the point is that even if it's like a higher number than is currently displayed on the WeFunder page, I have to be careful how I talk about it because of the SEC regulations. It's still a relatively small number in the scheme of things for a company that's operating like Substack's operating.
Yeah.
But it's nice to have the vote from the writers in the community in supporting this mission.
Yeah, absolutely. I was telling you yesterday, I was just amazed that, it's such a show of loyalty on the behalf of your customer base. So this was an extension of that Series B that you raised, I guess, in 2021. And you were asking people to invest at a $585 million pre-money valuation. I ask this because a former colleague of mine, Dan Primack, wrote in a post last week that you should have released more information about your financials to the people that were funding the crowdfunding platform. He said, you were asking your writers to help you out and you were being disrespectful to them for not giving them more current information. I guess the numbers you provided were from 2021. It's a little dated.
They're a little dated. We're not a public company, so we don't intend to sort of start behaving like a public company. We follow the regulations in terms of what you need to release in terms of a community round like that. But the people who are investing in Substack in a round like this are not doing the napkin math on like Substack as if it were like a SaaS business and trying to figure out what the P/E multiples are and extrapolating and seeing how this line may change over time. They're betting in Substack because they believe in Substack. They believe in the mission. They believe what this company stands for, and they believe it has a chance of becoming something huge. And I think either we're right about what Substack can become, and it can become this giant cultural and financial economic force in the world. In which case, all the people who are betting on Substack can get rewarded and can feel like they made a good bet. Or we're not, and we become not so great, not so big, not so financially successful, and we were very upfront with the communications around this community around that if you don't have money to spare, you shouldn't do it. The startups are risky, inherently risky. Substack has a big, ambitious mission, and we're swinging really big, and we can't guarantee that it's going to work out.
Sure.
But yeah, different people are going to have different opinions.
Sure.
If everyone agreed, it wouldn't be fun.
Well, clearly there are a lot of people in your corner. I did want to ask, just because it's my job, if you wanted to help out Dan and provide any new numbers. Now that you...
No, we don't typically just provide new numbers, but the numbers have been very, very solid. We've got 2 million paid subscriptions, more than 35 million active subscriptions monthly, 17,000 writers making money, top 10 publishers on Substack making more than $25 million a year. There's $300 million paid out by readers to writers in the course of Substack's history. We're feeling very confident, very optimistic about current growth in a difficult climate. So, no new numbers, sorry, but good momentum.
Okay, great. I did want to ask, so it's sort of like the Pareto principle. You mentioned the top 10 writers, I think, producing $25 million in revenue. I guess, what percentage of your overall revenue is that $25 million?
I don't know the percentage, but it is, the shape of the distribution is probably not that surprising to anyone who's ever studied platform dynamics. The big owners do account for an outsized share of the overall revenue. There's a long tail, there's a middle class. We're putting in a lot of effort to grow the middle class and the long tail, which is things like Substack Notes, which gives writers more distribution in this easy to publish to network, helps with. We have another feature called Recommendations that is the largest contributor in this network force that is now driving 40% of the subscriptions on Substack network. 40% of the subscriptions across the platform come directly from the Substack network. 15% of the paid subscriptions come directly from the Substack network. So all these things are things that can help lift up the ones who are not already at the head of the fish, or whatever it is. But yeah, it's not unlike other platforms in that the big owners have an outsized share.
Sure. Well, I did want to ask, if you mentioned the middle class and the long tail, what about those creators? Because I mean, it sounds like, Matt Taibbi and others are very wedded to the platform, but, once they establish this business, like, I'm sure some of them do have the thought, like, why should I still pay Substack 10% of my...
Why don't I leave and set up my own
thing?
thing? Yeah, it's a good pressure to have on us, and we set it up deliberately so that we would have that good pressure. The other platforms, you get locked in, you can't, like, export your social media follow graph or your payments relationships, or your mailing list, or your content, like you can from Substack. And a lot of people have sort of told us we're crazy for doing that. But I think it's really important, especially for a platform that wants to establish trust, because then the onus is on us to prove that we are delivering enough value to them to keep them on, so that they'll never want to leave. And we have a pretty good track record of publishers growing with Substack and not leaving. And we're introducing more and more support and features for the more complex publishers that have grander ambitions. And we're starting to see some publications that had left Substack to go and pursue this different vision of maybe I can save some money and build my own stack. We're starting to see some of those people come back. Mario from Gabrielle, who writes a thing called The Generalist, wrote a big essay about why he came back to Substack the other day. And so I think the power of the network is the thing that will ultimately keep people in Substack. They'll get growth on Substack that they wouldn't get if they're doing it on their own. And so, it's a good pressure for us to have and to respond to, and it gives power to the writers, which is how the world should be.
But I guess, but are there special features then just for like a certain tier of creators?
We're starting to, everyone has access to the same features, and everyone pays the same price, which is 10% of their revenue. And we're just starting to engage in some efforts, which I guess you could call it a pilot, to support the more ambitious publisher who have more complex needs. And the way we do that is the way we've done things always at Substack. We'll start in an unscalable way with a small group or one or two people, and then we'll generalize those tools and features so that anyone can have access to them.
Can you be a little bit more specific about some of what are those?
For example, the Free Press, which is a publication that Barry Weiss started, we helped them get a new website built on the Substack rails, tied into the Substack system and network. So they benefit from all the network effects of Substack, but they have a different aesthetic look on their webpage, for example.
Okay, great. And how is Substack Pro going? So there was this program where you're paying top writers to come over, and you pay them basically a stipend to kind of cover, I guess, the salary that they'd be giving up.
Yeah, for a lot of people in the early days of Substack, so Pro we don't do anymore, but in the early days of Substack, one of our challenges was to convince people that they should spend their full-time focus on building a business on Substack. Great people who could have said yes to any number of other opportunities, like working at the New York Times or getting a TV show or something else. And these were people who wanted to do Substack. They believed in the model and they saw the success that other people were having. But they needed a little bit of financial security for some cases. And so we developed this program which would give them a minimum guarantee for the first year. And during that year, we would keep, instead of 10% of the revenue, we'd keep 85% of the revenue. So they have this stability, but they also get a cherry on top from the 15% of the revenue. And we get an offset because that de-risked it for us. And that program was never going to be a long-lasting thing. It was an admittedly unsustainable thing that we invested in to kickstart the network. Because when these great writers come in, you not only raise the sort of reputation of the ecosystem by having the best writers in the world, and the best writers want to be where the best writers are, but you also bring in millions of readers that they bring in with them, which helps fill the buckets for the network. That helps make this a more robust ecosystem overall. And now it's got to the point where, because the network is bootstrapped in that way, because the network is working, the network effects that are generated organically on Substack is so compelling that it's less necessary to spend money to help writers seed their businesses or seed their publications.
Great. And also, I had read one woman who had said, I mean, I just think sometimes certain writers are just not very good at asking for subscription revenue, and so I was just reading before I came here, somebody who said they really benefited and they loved Substack and they were staying, but they didn't think that they'd actually, like, it would have been a great investment for you because they haven't converted a lot of those readers, but they're planning to work a little bit harder on that now.
Right.
I also wanted to ask about podcasts. So you rolled this out about a year ago, and I think this is part of your whole vision of like developing a cultural engine. I guess what percentage of your customers are using?
I'm bad at percent. Anytime you ask me for numbers, I'm like, I'm the writer guy.
I need a percentage.
So podcasting is a significant and growing part of the Substack ecosystem. In many cases, it's writers who had newsletters or publications and they wanted to start a podcast, and we can make it sort of one-click simple for them to have a podcast that gets distributed anywhere, Spotify, Apple, or the other podcast players, and through Substack, which means they get the email and the app and the web distribution, and they can put subscriber-only stuff out there and start making money. And they don't have to chase ads and all that kind of stuff. And in some cases, we've got people who are just adding a podcast to their overall mix. In some cases, we've got people who are coming in who are podcast first, like The Fifth Column or Blocked and Reported, or Josh Barrow's got one called Very Serious. There's a bunch of them now. And that's in keeping with our view that Substack is not just about writers with newsletters. It's about kind of media entrepreneurs who are starting their own media empires, and that might be text focused, or it might be video focused, or it might be audio focused, or it might be community focused, or it might be a mix of all of those things. And we think there's a lot of room to explore there. And each one of these opportunities are interesting in their own right. Put together, that's a really powerful force.
Has anybody sold a company who started it on Substack?
Nothing that I know of. Nothing springs immediately to mind, probably.
What about video?
I know actually there's one Substack called Grit Capital that bought two other Substacks and rolled them into it like a Substack network.
Oh, interesting.
Network, yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Video. Is that
video?
Is that on
Yeah, we've got a beta product for video, so you can publish video in Substack, make it subscriber-only video. There's a lot more we can do with it. We have big ambitions for video in the future, but we haven't got to that point in the priority list.
Well, also, like so many other startups right now, you're kind of in a tough spot because the market's awful. Like you said, you want to kind of like extend your runway while also innovating. So how do you think about, I guess, prioritizing your list of features that you want to roll out?
It is a challenging market, and it has pros and cons. So we're an 80-person company, and we can stay really lean and move really fast and not be distracted by having to hire or having to fundraise. And there's also some of the other competitors that kind of struggle more or disappear because of the difficult conditions. So that's helpful to us in that way. In terms of prioritization, our prioritization order is kind of the tools, the network, and then the destinations. And we're very much in so the tools are like you can publish a blog post, a newsletter, and podcast, whatever. The network is things like Substack notes, things like recommendations that are thickening this interaction and cross-pollination within the network that helps people grow just by dint of being there. And then the destinations, things like our apps. I guess Notes is a destination in its own right. The Substack website, where you can use it as a reader. And so we prioritize things that help writers grow and the things that might attract the next generation of great writers to succeed on Substack. I know it's pretty general, but that's what I got.
And are you marketing Substack at all, or is it just completely organic growth? Are you spending any money on?
We don't spend any money on marketing.
You just have to get Elon Musk to.
We just have to provoke the right billionaire. The Substack Pro program, you could argue, is marketing, because every time a writer would come on board, they'd tell their big audience about why they're coming on to Substack. But we get the same benefits from recruiting writers now without spending, without spending any money, and the writers still talk about why they're coming on Substack. We get a lot of word of mouth benefit. We get a lot of press. We've got our own powerful channels through our own Substacks. We do some drinks nights with writers.
Oh, that's nice.
That helps. That's always fun. Harder when it was in the pandemic. But no, we don't spend a lot on marketing. We don't spend anything on marketing, really.
And then, I think one thing that people thought about Substack was that it was sort of benefiting from a COVID effect. People were trapped at home. They were, trying to find ways to entertain themselves. They were starting Substacks. They were reading Substacks.
Yeah.
And I know you don't want to talk about numbers, but can you sort of underscore that's...
Well, we did benefit. We got a huge tailwind from the lockdowns, which are unfortunate reasons, but a lot of companies saw this, kind of like the Zoom effect, where in the first 3 months, we grew 60% in the first 3 months of those lockdowns, and that's revenue growth. And that was in a particularly unusual time, and like all those other companies, the growth was unsustainable at that level for long. But we have continued to grow really strongly, and some other companies kind of disappeared as the COVID tailwinds died away. But yeah, that was a big boost at a particular time in our evolution where it mattered a lot and it contributed to more sort of chatter and attention that helped Substack overall.
And I just wanted to sort of, again, go back to kind of the financing, because you're building a company, you want it to be sustainable, terrible market, you've raised this crowdfunded amount of money. It's a little bit complicated. I mean, again, I don't think people were necessarily investing to get a return. I think they were supporting you. But if you think about it as a little bit of a tip jar, I don't know how many times you can go back to that. So would you ever do another crowdfunding?
This is not a fundraising strategy for us. It was a chance to let writers invest in the company if they believed in it. In most cases, you don't, as a writer, if you don't have an inside track with investors or founders, you don't have a chance to invest in a company before IPO. Right. And so for many of the writers, and actually readers, because readers could do it too, it seemed like a good opportunity. And if you look through the comments on the WeFunder page, wefunder.com/Substack, you can see how pumped people are. They're saying words like, we believe so much in this company, we believe so much in the mission, we love Substack. And so I think there's a way where people can feel like they're investing to support a mission, and there might be a happy economic outcome as well. But I can't say things about valuation and stuff because of the SEC. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess what I was wondering a little bit is whether you would go back and do another venture round, if that's inevitable or not necessarily.
Well, it's not necessarily inevitable, and it's not impossible. It depends on the conditions. It depends on the market. It depends how we feel about where we are in our what our trajectory is like. We're certainly not opposed to it. If the timing is right and the conditions are right, we might take advantage.
Do you think it would be hard to meet that valuation that was set before?
I'm not sure how much trouble I would get in with the SEC, but I believe very, very strongly in Substack. I think its cultural impact and cultural footprint is already significant, and that its financial impact will have no trouble catching up.
To ask us a super annoying question, but I saw somebody theorizing on Twitter over the weekend that Elon Musk was beating up Substack because he wants to potentially buy it. Would you ever go into business with Elon Musk?
I won't comment on that kind of stuff, but I will say that my personal preferred course for Substack, and share this view with the other founders, Chris and Jiraj, is that Substack is best when it's independent. And that writers have bet their businesses, in many cases, and their futures on Substack and not some other company. So we want to stay true to that promise to writers.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, Hamish, we're out of time, but this is so fun.
Yeah,
I'm
thanks
so
very
glad
much.
we finally got to meet in person.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.